Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Chuck Morse Speaks. Thanks to BNN Studios. We're talking religion today. My guests are from Share International. David Meinhardt is here. Cindy Bruder is here. And the religion that you guys represent, to use the word loosely, religion, I know that you don't necessarily ascribe to that, but it's a body of beliefs. One of the reasons it's interesting to me is because, from what I understand, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the Share International represents a very powerful influence amongst, I would say, the world's elites, the top 1% internationally. It's the semi-official religion of the United Nations, for example. The meditation room at the United Nations is part of it, going back to the days of Theosophy and Helena Petrovsky. And that it's something that is embraced by an element within the United Nations that seeks this idea of a world order. And that there's the coming of a Messiah that you call the Lord Metreya that is going to usher into this messianic age when all of mankind becomes like a one world, I don't know, ant colony. I don't mean to sound derogatory, but it's, everybody gives up bourgeois affectations like individual property and trade and all these rights, or things that we think are rights, what Karl Marx called false consciousness. So that's what's interesting to me, the influence that you have on very high-level people. So therefore, I feel like I need to explore exactly what it is you believe in. Mm-hmm. Now, you talk about this Lord Metreya as being, in the conventional terms, a messianic figure, a Messiah.
Well, let me clarify. First, this is not a religion. And it's also not a belief system. So there's no belief system, no dogma, no doctrine associated with the ageless wisdom teaching, which is really not a religion or a philosophy or anything of that sort. But or a science. But there's elements of all three of those in it. And as far as influence goes, the 1%, the elite, for the most part, here on the earth, is not at all interested in Share International's message, because it's more a message of justice and peace, and on food, shelter, healthcare, education, equality and justice, and a clean environment for all. So while there are elements of it throughout the world, and that is true, the elite is less interested in it than the normal man on the street. And we also have no connection to any kind of world government or any kind of philosophy like that. And Metreya is coming as mankind's brother, as your friend. He's not your guru. He's not your religious figure. He's not a political leader. And so their message is one of free will. They don't want to interfere with mankind's free will in any way. They're here as teachers, merely to advise. So you're free to reject all of what they teach.
Cindy?
To follow on with David, it is a philosophy. It's basically a follow-on from Madame Blavatsky's teachings, the Theosophy teachings, and Alice Bailey and the Lucas Trust teachings. And then this final is, our information comes from Benjamin Creme and Share International. And he considers himself basically the third chunk of information in recent, in the modern history of the world.
Now, when I look at I don't know a lot about the Lucis Trust. I've looked at their website. I know in the 1920s it was the Lucifer Publishing Society. But what I see from the website is that it's a very, for lack of a better word, a rather communistic idea of equal distribution of wealth and equal distribution of material resource. And that leads me to my question about this Lord Metreya, because this is your version of a Messiah as opposed to the Judeo-Christian version. The issue I have with it is that this Messiah, the Lord Metreya, from what I can discern, and you're certainly welcome to correct me if I'm wrong, there is no set of values there. You mentioned there's no dogma. Well, yeah, there is no moral or ethical precept that's involved in this. Judaism teaches that God is a creator of the universe, but also a lawgiver. And that thus, at Sinai, the Lord God gave the world through the Jewish people a set of morals and ethics that they can measure their life. Jesus embraced that same principle. He said that not a single jot or tittle of the Torah will ever be changed until the end of time, and that he was upholding that covenant. And I think that that's what is needed here. If there's not going to be a dogma that we can look at and judge, for better or for worse, then you have essentially a secular, non-committal, amoral faith. Am I wrong?
Well, let me clarify that for you. Everyone is awaiting a world teacher. The Jews await the Messiah, the Christians await the Christ, the Buddhists await the Metreya, they at least got the name right, the Muslims await the Imam Mahdi, and the Hindus await the latest incarnation of Krishna. So, in a sense, Metreya epitomizes all of these people, and yet he's not coming as a religious figure per se. Why? Because all of that has already been learned by humanity. We have the philosophy down, we have the religion down, we have the morals down. He's not an amoral figure. He's not here to do away with morals. They're here, as you could say in a sense Jesus is, to fulfill all of this. So we've got all that down. We've got the religion. We've got the philosophy. The problem today, the crisis today for humanity, is in the political sphere. The crisis is we have 25,000 people dying every day in a world with a 12% food surplus. Nobody should be going hungry. We have an environment at the precipice. We're about ready to fall off, but we won't. We'll pull back in time, but we're on the edge. We have widespread injustice and inequality. People can't afford proper education, health care, housing. These are the crises we have today, and these are the priorities of the Masters of Wisdom. So they are not amoral. They're not throwing out the covenant. They ask everyone, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, and any other religion, to stay in your religious traditions. They're not here to interfere with that. Their message is to complement what it is you've already embraced. And if you were to speak to Metreya, he would say, stay in your Jewish tradition. That's where you belong, and that's where you're going to fulfill your faith.
Yeah. So, Metreya, if you want to take spiritual lessons from Metreya, he's going to teach us right relationship. Help me out here.
You talk about the law of return and karma.
Yeah, well, there's karma involved that, we experience that, for every action there's an opposite and equal reaction. But there's I'm at a loss for words. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I mean, what you're describing, the Torah already does that. It has the moral and ethical precepts that were received at Sinai. Why do we need a Metreya? I mean, if in a sense what you're talking about, and it seems fairly explicit, is not a supernatural idea here. It's not a spiritual idea. It's a political idea. It's a secular idea. And that the idea that you're talking about, the solution or the approach to that, from what I can tell, looking at the Lucis Trust website, is a communistic approach. It's collectivist. It's seeking to end things like poverty and suffering and injustice by distributing material, by redistributing everything so that everybody is equal. I mean, we could take a look at the Marxist slogan, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. You have a world where everyone becomes equal. That seems to be the political vision that we're talking about here.
So if I can clarify that.
There is a balance in everything.
Yes. What they're talking about is not communism. In fact, what Metreya has said is that isms imprison. Because, we talk about it, and we'd say that I'm a Caucasian, I live in the United States, I'm a liberal, or I'm this or I'm that. All these are metaphysical drugs, you'd say. Get away from those. What you are is the soul and incarnation. So to go back to what you're talking about, they're not talking about any particular ism, and they're not talking about taking away people's belongings and redistributing. This is not Dr. Zhivago. What he's talking about is, and the plan is for each country to take stock of what they have in excess, and then all that information will be tabulated by a UN agency, and they will voluntarily take what they have in excess as a country, and each country will do this, and redistribute it to where it is needed throughout the world. And all this will be done voluntarily. No one will be asked to give up anything.
See, you can call it what you want. I know you don't want to use isms. I would say this is a communist scheme. Now, you've also said that you see the UN as the catalyst to do this. And that's kind of confirms my point, and I've studied this somewhat, that this is the quasi-official faith or belief system of the UN. Now, I don't know if they believe in the Metreya or what, but if you take a look at the history of the UN, going all the way back to their founding Secretary General, Alger Hiss, they embrace these ideas of the UN as serving this role of regulating the nation states and deciding who gets to keep what, and putting stuff here from here to there and moving stuff around the world to make everything equal, which is a communistic vision.
I see it more as a justice issue.
Right, I'm sure.
And there's always going to be, some level of haves and have-nots. There's going to be, the movers and shakers in the world and those that can't seem to get out of their own way. That's just, we come into life with whatever our abilities or not are. But one of the things that we're seeing is just the great inequity that we've got, and especially in this country now, we've got some of the elite that are making tremendous amounts of money, but a third of the children in the U.S. are on food stamps. Where is the justice there? Is that, I don't know if that's I don't think that's a communistic vision, but
it's an important political question. The answer is not a communistic answer, though, I would argue. The answer is a free market answer, which has made the United States the most wealthy country in the world. We didn't become wealthy because we were taking something away from someone else. We became wealthy because we recognized certain principles of freedom that allowed us to create. And thus, those principles are universal. They can be accepted by other countries. But then you have a country like, I don't know, we can mention Venezuela, which has a very socialistic system, and they can't even have, people don't even have toilet paper. People are starving. It's the third richest country in the world in terms of oil exports. They got billions of dollars pouring in, but the money goes to the great, it doesn't go to a private corporation. It goes to these great leaders who are there to help the little guy. And as a result, you have more suffering than any country in the region right now over there.
Well, you brought up an important point. I'm glad you mentioned this. What the Metreya and the Masters are ushering in is what we would call the Age of Aquarius. And it is more than just a pop song in the 60s.
Right.
Each of these ages lasts about 2,150 years. The last one was the Age of Pisces, ushered in by the historical figure we know as Jesus. So that symbol of the fish, that was Pisces. So people who have that as a bumper sticker for Jesus actually have an astrological symbol on their car. So in this age, the Aquarian age is about synthesis, brotherhood, ecological restoration, peace, and equality. So what do I mean when I say synthesis, Chuck? Politically, since you brought that up, we're talking about instead of socialism and capitalism, we have a combination. Social democracy, democratic socialism. That way, everyone gets their basic needs met, but at the same time, you have a free market. People can make money and do business as they wish, and it's not taken from them by the state and forcibly distributed, as you mentioned in communism.
Well, I mean, there's already the idea of having a mix between socialism and capitalism is something that's been tried. It's called fascism. And I think that it's really a matter of whether or not, to the degree by which an authoritarian state, a secular state, is going to be involved in controlling our lives and our destinies. The American idea is that that's not to be the case. That's also the idea of the Torah, that man. But I want to just switch gears here a little bit, because we've gone over this. We've talked about evolution as a founding idea for your group, but not necessarily Darwin's biological evolution. You've taken that theory, and this was done by Helena Petrovsky also.
Blavatsky, yeah.
And it was applied to a cosmic idea, that man is evolving into superior men through generations. And yet it embraces this Darwinian theory, which is contrary to the Judeo-Christian idea, which is that man is created equal, that we are men and women, it says, in the Torah, the book of Genesis, are created in the image of God. But as such, we are not gods. We can't be gods. We're never going to be perfect. We're imperfect beings. We're images of God. But we're all born equal. We all die equal. We have unequal talents and unequal circumstances in the course of our short lives.
That's what we're addressing.
Yeah, you want to have de facto equality.
Well, we're not talking about one person being superior to another. When we talk about evolution, the masters have presented evolution as the plan for humanity and the plan for the planet. When we talk about people being at different points in their evolution, we're not talking about one being superior to another. Everyone is equal. If you met Metreya, he would tell you that there's no difference between you and him. The only difference, you might say, is that he's fully self-actualized, and we're still working on that, meaning you and I. So it's not a sense of equality. It's more like we're in kindergarten, they're in grad school. As human beings, you're still equal, but we have some learning to do. So that's the only difference. It's a developmental level. It's not a value level.
But that's why I'm saying that this is the idea that appeals to the elites, the top 1%, people who are, they feel that they've, either by circumstance or by accomplishment, they're superior.
I have a good example for that.
And they want to, therefore, use that superiority to try to improve the world literally. Not necessarily in terms of giving an example of how other people might become successful, but that somehow they have some kind of a divine mandate to improve the world. This was the very thing, this is why I'm saying that this is, your ideas you're expressing appeal to that, that particular genre. You know, they want to change human nature, really, when it comes down to it.
Well, we've actually found that Metreya and the Masters' ideals haven't had much appeal to that particular group. But let me give you an example. The Masters brought up this story. They said, for example, a village in Africa, in a war-torn region, where most of the men were killed as a result of the war, and it was more of a patriarchal type of culture where they held most of the positions of power. Now that the men are gone, women have to take this over. And so a particular woman might end up being the tribal leader, and she's brilliant. She's drop-dead brilliant. She can't spell her own name. She's illiterate, and yet she's brilliant. This is an example of how education does not make you superior. And you know we have lots of people in high places of power who have made a mess of this world. So the Masters don't ascribe to that. People who don't have any education can be brilliant. People who have 5 degrees could be destroying the world. So our message does not appeal to the elite, a few people in the elite. If it appealed to all of them, it would be a completely different movie at this point.
Well, I'm not saying it necessarily appeals to the elite in terms of the adjoining share international, you know, not in a de facto sense. I'm saying that it is an elitist idea that in the broad sense appeals to the elite, who tend to not be particularly oriented toward Judaism or Christianity. They tend to be more into this idea of creating a new world by using government, and in the UN as government, as a mechanism, as a vehicle. And ultimately that it requires coercion sometimes, because it's necessary in a last-ditch situation to try to bring about this new age.
That's something else that's important that you brought up. Do you want to speak to that, the people power?
Well, I think one of the roles of government is to help create justice, and to create a level playing field. We've got a lot of talent, but now we're talking about the crisis of student loans, and if somebody's intelligent enough to go to college and what have you, and they make a point of taking out all these student loans, now they're saddled with all this debt. That sifts out a lot of people that aren't able to financially afford college. So perhaps government could help that way in creating a little more just playing field, advancing Pell Grants, or some of the, making it more accessible to the brain power that is available.
And if I could add something to that, I wanted to speak more directly to your question. The masters have said that this is the age of the group, not the individual. In the age of Pisces, we perfected sort of the individual mentality, because before that, people thought in sort of a herd mentality back in Jesus' time. Now we've perfected the idea of the individual, and we've taken it too far, everyone doing their own thing. The age of Aquarius is the age of groups, not so much the age of leaders. So actually, the master's message is contrary to what you have described. They're talking about people power. The New World superpower is people power, not governments. And the power is with the people, not with the leaders.
I couldn't disagree with you more. I think that we, in our modern society, particularly in the United States, which I think is the flowering of this, it is the power of the sovereign individual, free will, operating in his own interests, determining his own destiny, forming his own associations with other people of like mind on a voluntary basis to accomplish things. But the principle is that, you're a sovereign citizen, that this is a progressive idea. This idea of groupthink and of going back to group, there's no such thing. That's a manufactured idea. We set up governments to protect justice, not create justice. We have a system, that's why we have a system of laws that is supposed to be for, not made by men, but are made that are more immutable and that are equally applied. That's why we have a separate judiciary, so that it's not politicized. Obviously, we're imperfect, so therefore we can't get perfect justice. That's impossible. But the progressive idea is to move toward justice and law and order through a system that respects individual rights. Now, as far as Pell Grants go, yes. Why is college so expensive? It's because it has all these lobbyists getting special laws passed to protect its industry. If we had the government get out of the business of that, colleges would have to compete in the open market like any other business, and the cost would go down. I mean, in some cases. In other cases, it would be up. Anyway, we're going to take a break. We're going to take some PSAs, and we shall return after these messages.
I love taking care of my mom. It wasn't easy at first. She learned how to better communicate her needs.
And you learned how to not ignore yours.
I discovered how to make healthier meals.
And I discovered how much I enjoyed them.
Becoming a caregiver is a learning experience for everyone. Find articles, tips, and tools from experts and others who have been in your place. The Caregiving Resource Center at aarp.org/caregiving.
They say that when you're facing extreme danger, your life flashes before you. If you think that's sad, consider facing it before you even have enough life to flash before your eyes. Car crashes are a leading killer of children 1 to 13. Deaths and injuries can be prevented by using the right car seat. Visit